During my son's wedding, his bride pointed a manicured finger at my face and screamed, "Get out of here and do not come back. You are not welcome here." The 200 guests went silent, holding their breath. I simply smoothed my worn jacket, looked her in the eye and replied, "Okay, I will go, but I am taking a few others with me." She laughed in my face, thinking I was just a senile old man mumbling nonsense. She did not know that when I walked out that door, I would literally be taking the entire wedding with me. Before I tell you how I ruined the most expensive night of her life, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by your own family. My name is Bernard Sutton, and I am 72 years old. I sat at table number 19, which was the table furthest from the stage, tucked behind a large decorative pillar near the swinging kitchen doors. This was where they put the people they wanted to hide. It was the table for the distant cousins nobody liked and the drivers. I looked down at my suit. It was charcoal gray, double-breasted, and admittedly a bit shiny at the elbows from decades of wear. The fabric was worn thin near the cuffs, and the style was clearly from a different era. To the guests at this wedding at the Grand Oak Haven estate, I looked like a man who had lost everything. I looked like a failure. But to me, this suit was everything. I bought it 40 years ago with my late wife Clara the day we signed the lease on our first logistics warehouse. It was the suit I wore when I made my first $1 million. It was the suit I wore when I buried Clara. It held more value in its threads than the entire ballroom combined. But my daughter-in-law Brittany did not see history or sentimental value. She only saw poverty. She saw a stain on her perfect Instagram aesthetic. I was sipping a glass of water when I felt a hand snatch the glass away from me. I looked up to see Brittany standing there in her $25,000 custom lace gown. Her face was contorted in a mask of pure disgust. She leaned down so her face was inches from mine and hissed through her teeth, "What are you doing at the VIP table, old man? You look like a beggar who wandered in off the street. My friends are asking who the homeless man is. Get up and go to the back table with the staff where you belong." I did not respond immediately. I slowly turned my gaze to the man standing just behind her, my son Jason. He was 32 years old and looked dashing in his tuxedo. He was wearing a Rolex Submariner on his left wrist, a watch that cost $20,000. I knew exactly how much it cost, because I was the one who secretly paid off his credit card bill last month, when he could not make the minimum payment. I had been doing that for 5 years, covering his gambling debts, his failed crypto investments, and his lifestyle inflation, all while pretending to be a poor retiree, so he would not feel emasculated. I looked at him, searching for a spark of defense. I waited for him to tell his new wife to speak to his father with respect. Jason avoided my eyes. He pretended to adjust his cufflinks. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the floor. He did anything to avoid acknowledging the man who had changed his diapers and paid for his Ivy League education. The silence from my son was louder than any scream. Brittany saw his weakness and took it as permission to escalate. She snapped her fingers in front of my face. "Are you deaf as well as poor?" I said. "Move. You are embarrassing us. Look at this suit, it smells like mothballs and failure." I placed my hands on the table and spoke for the first time. My voice was calm and low. "This suit has seen more success than you will ever know, Brittany, and I am sitting here because I am the father of the groom." She let out a sharp, cruel laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "Father of the groom. You are a charity case, Bernard. We only invited you because Jason felt guilty. But if you cannot dress the part, you do not get to sit with the important people. My parents are sitting at the head table. They paid for the flowers. What did you pay for?" "Nothing." "You are a leech." Her parents, Richard and Pamela, were watching from the head table with glasses of champagne in their hands. They were smirking. They were real estate developers who judged human worth by square footage. They had spent the entire rehearsal dinner making subtle jokes about my old sedan and my small cottage. They did not know the cottage was just the guest house of my main estate. They did not know the sedan was just the car I drove to keep people like them away. I looked at Jason again. Son, are you going to let her speak to me like this? Jason finally looked at me, but his eyes were cold and empty. Dad, please just do what she says. Britt is under a lot of stress today. Just go to the back or maybe go wait in the car until the ceremony is over. You do look a bit out of place here. The betrayal hit me physically like a punch to the gut. It wasn't the words themselves, it was the casual ease with which he discarded me. He chose the illusion of wealth over the man who had sacrificed everything for him. He chose a woman who measured love in dollars over a father who loved him without condition. I took a deep breath, and the last thread of my patience finally snapped. I did not get angry. I did not yell. I simply felt a cold clarity wash over me. The Bernard who protected his son was gone. The Bernard who built a logistics empire from a single truck had just entered the room. I stayed seated. I picked up my napkin and unfolded it slowly, placing it on my lap. I am comfortable here, Jason. I will finish my water. Brittany turned a shade of red I had never seen before. She was not used to being told no. She was a woman who had tantrums until the world gave her what she wanted. She looked around the room and saw that people at the nearby tables were whispering. She felt her control slipping. She grabbed a bottle of wine from the table and slammed it down, making the cutlery rattle. "That is it," she screamed. Her voice was so loud that the string quartet in the corner stopped playing. The chatter in the room died instantly. 200 heads turned toward table 19. "Get out," she shrieked, pointing at the double doors. "Get out of here right now. You are ruining my wedding. You are ruining my aesthetic. You are a stubborn old man, and you are not welcome here. I want you gone. Now." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. It was the kind of silence where you could hear a pin drop. The guests were frozen. Some looked horrified, but most looked at me with pity. They saw a poor old man being evicted by a bridezilla. They did not know they were watching a lion being poked by a mouse. My son Jason stood there and did nothing. He actually took a step back, distancing himself from me, as if poverty were a contagious disease. I stood up. I did not rush. I pushed my chair back, and it made a scraping sound against the marble floor. I brushed a crumb off my lapel. I buttoned my double-breasted jacket. I stood tall, my posture straight despite my 72 years. I looked at Brittany. Her chest was heaving with rage. I looked at Jason. He was looking at his wife with fear. I looked at her parents, Richard and Pamela, who were now standing up, looking ready to call security. "You want me to leave?" I asked, my voice projecting clearly across the silent room. "Yes," Brittany yelled. "Leave, and do not come back. We do not need you." I nodded slowly. I turned to look at the room. I saw the faces of the servers, the bartenders, the musicians. I saw the head chef peeking out from the kitchen. I made eye contact with Pierre, the general manager of the estate, who was standing by the entrance holding a clipboard. Pierre had been watching the entire exchange with a look of absolute horror, not at me, but for them. I turned back to Brittany and Jason. "Very well," I said. "I will leave. You have made your position clear. You do not want me here because I do not fit your image of wealth. You do not want me here because I cannot pay for flowers." "I just want you gone," Brittany interrupted. "Okay," I said. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a businessman closing a ledger on a bad investment. "I will go, but I am going to take some others with me." Brittany let out a scoffing laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. "Who are you going to take with you?" "The old waiter. Nobody here cares about you. Nobody here even knows you. You are nothing. Go sit in your rusted car and drive back to your shack." She waved her hand dismissively, turning her back on me to signal the band to start playing again. She thought it was over. She thought she had won. She thought she had taken out the trash. I looked at Pierre, the manager. I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers. A single sharp sound. Pierre immediately straightened his back. He tapped his earpiece and spoke one word that the entire room heard because the music had not started yet. Execute. And that is when the nightmare for my son and his bride truly began. I turned my back on them and began to walk toward the exit. My footsteps were steady. I did not look back, but I could hear the confusion starting to ripple through the room. I could hear the sound of movement. Not just one person, but many. Brittany turned around, confused. Wait, why is the music not playing? I kept walking. I reached the large oak doors of the ballroom. I paused for just a second. I wanted to savor this. I wanted them to remember this moment for the rest of their lives. The moment they pushed the wrong man too far. I pushed the doors open and stepped into the cool night air. The valet was already there, holding the door open to a car. But it was not my old rusted sedan. It was a phantom black Bentley Flying Spur. Thank you, I said to the valet. I got into the back seat and rolled down the window. I could hear Brittany screaming inside. I could hear the chaos erupting. I leaned back in the soft leather seat and closed my eyes. The wedding was over. The lesson had begun. The echo of my fingers snapping seemed to hang in the air longer than the physics of sound should allow. It was a sharp, decisive crack that acted like a breaker switch for the entire room. In the movies, time slows down, but here in the grand ballroom of the Oak Haven estate, time seemed to accelerate into chaos. Brittany was still standing with her back to the doors, her hand frozen in the air where she had dismissed me. She expected the band to resume their song. She expected the waiters to continue pouring the champagne. She expected the world to keep revolving around her desires, because that is what the world had always done for her. But the music did not start. The violins remained lowered. The cellist placed his bow on his stand with a clatter that sounded like a dropped weapon in the silence. Pierre, the estate's general manager, a man who usually moved with the invisible grace of a ghost, suddenly stepped into the center of the floor. He was wearing an immaculate tuxedo, and up until this moment, he had treated Brittany with the deference due to a princess. But as my snap faded, his posture changed. He straightened his spine, adjusted his cuffs, and raised a hand toward the waitstaff. It was a subtle gesture, a mere flick of the wrist, but the effect was immediate and absolute. Every server in the room stopped. The young man pouring wine at table 4 froze mid-pour, lifting the bottle before a single drop could spill. The waitresses carrying heavy silver trays of hors d'oeuvres turned on their heels with military precision. They did not look at the guests. They did not look at the bride. They looked at Pierre, waiting for the next command. Brittany blinked, confused by the sudden stillness. She turned to Pierre, her face flushing with irritation. "Excuse me," she snapped, her voice shrill in the quiet room. "Why has the service stopped? I did not tell them to stop. Get the wine moving. My guests are thirsty." Pierre ignored her. He did not even blink. He walked right past her, his polished shoes clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. He walked with purpose, his eyes fixed on a point behind her. Brittany turned, expecting him to be heading toward the security team to finally drag me out. She smirked, crossing her arms, ready to watch my humiliation. But Pierre did not walk to security. He walked to me. He stopped exactly 3 feet in front of me. He placed his right hand over his heart and bowed. It was not a shallow, polite nod. It was a deep, formal bow of profound respect, the kind reserved for royalty or heads of state. "Good evening, Mr. Sutton." Pierre said, his voice projecting clearly so that every person in the room could hear him. "I apologize for the disturbance. We were waiting for your signal. The Bentley is heated and waiting at the south portico. Shall I have your personal security detail escort you, or would you prefer to walk?" the room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the space. Brittany's jaw unhinged. She looked at Pierre, then at me, then back at Pierre. Her brain was misfiring, unable to process the data. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, stomping her foot like a toddler. "Why are you bowing to him? He is a nobody. He is a beggar. I am the client. I am the one paying you. Look at me when I am talking to you." Pierre slowly straightened up. He turned his head toward her, his expression devoid of the warmth he had shown her during the months of wedding planning. He looked at her with the cold detachment of a man looking at a stain on a tablecloth. "You are not the client," Mrs. Colpierre said, using her maiden name intentionally. "You have never been the client. You have been the guest." "I am the bride," she screamed, pointing at her chest. "My father paid the deposit." Pierre shook his head slightly. "Your father paid for the flowers and the photographer. But the venue, the catering, the staff, the bar, the security, the Oakhaven estate itself, that was provided at zero cost. It was a gift from who?" she demanded, her voice cracking. Pierre gestured to me with an open hand. "From the chairman of the board, from the owner of the Oakhaven Hospitality Group, from Mr. Bernard Sutton." If silence could be heavy, this silence weighed 1,000 tons. Brittany looked at me. Her eyes were wide white circles of panic. She looked at my worn suit again, searching for the lie, searching for the joke. She looked at Jason. My son was pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He knew I had money, or at least he knew I used to have a good job before I retired, but he had no idea of the scale. He had no idea that I did not just work in logistics, but that I owned the infrastructure. He had no idea that when I said I was downsizing to the cottage, it was because I was tired of managing the mansion, not because I couldn't afford it. Before Brittany could sputter out a denial, the double doors to the kitchen swung open with a bang. Jean-Luc, the executive chef, stormed out. Jean-Luc was a man of immense ego, a 3-star Michelin chef who rarely showed his face to mortals. He was wearing his pristine white chef's coat, his tall toque perched on his head. He was wiping his hands on a towel, his face red from the heat of the ovens. He marched past the head table. He marched past the trembling bride. He came directly to me. "Monsieur Sutton," Jean-Luc boomed, his French accent thick. "Pierre tells me we are scrubbing the service. Is this true? The lobster bisque is plated. The Wagyu is resting." I looked at the chef, a man I had hired 10 years ago, when he was just a promising sous chef in Paris. I had funded his first restaurant. I had saved his career. "Yes, Jean-Luc," I said softly. "I am leaving, and as per my contract, the staff goes where I go." Jean-Luc nodded vigorously. "Then the kitchen is closed. I do not cook for people who do not respect the hand that feeds them." He turned to look at Brittany spitting on the ground near the hem of her dress. "You have no taste, madame. You asked for ketchup with my Wagyu during the tasting. I should have quit then. But I stayed for him." He pointed a thumb at me. "Now he goes. I go." Brittany looked like she was having a stroke. She turned to her father, Richard, who was standing by the table looking as if he had seen a ghost. Richard knew the name Sutton. Everyone in the business world knew the name Sutton. It was a name associated with shipping lanes, warehouses, and luxury hotels. But Richard, in his arrogance, had never connected the old man in the cheap suit to the empire. He had assumed Bernard Sutton was a different man, a myth, or perhaps that I was just a poor relative with the same last name. Now the realization was crashing down on him. Bernard Richard stammered, stepping forward, his voice trembling. "Mr. Sutton." I had no idea. "We thought." "You thought what, Richard?" I asked, cutting him off. "You thought I was poor, so I did not matter. You thought dignity was reserved for tax brackets." Brittany finally found her voice, but it was weak, trembling with a mix of fury and terror. "This is a lie. This is a prank. Jason, tell them this is a prank. Your father is a mechanic. You told me he fixed trucks. Jason looked at me, his eyes pleading. Dad, stop this. You are scaring her. You do not own this place. You live in a cottage. Tell them you are joking. I looked at my son with pity. I did fix trucks, Jason. That is how I started. One truck. My hands were covered in grease for 10 years so yours could be soft. But I did not stop at one truck. I built a fleet. Then I bought the warehouses. Then I bought the land. Then I bought the hotels. I kept it quiet because I wanted you to build your own character. I wanted you to become a man who respects work, not a man who rests on my laurels. I gestured around the opulent room at the crystal chandeliers, the velvet drapes, the gold-leafed molding. I bought Oakhaven 5 years ago as a retirement project. I let you hold your wedding here for free, Jason. The bill for this venue would have been $200,000. I waived it. All of it. Because I loved you. I took a step toward Brittany. She flinched, stepping back, tripping over the train of her dress. But you, I said, my voice hard as iron. You looked at a man you thought had nothing, and you treated him like garbage. You judged the book by its cover, my dear. And now you have to deal with the author. Pierre stepped forward again, holding out a black leather portfolio. The staff is ready for extraction, Mr. Sutton. The vehicles are loaded. The kitchen is shutting down the gas lines. We can be fully vacated in 15 minutes. Brittany grabbed Pierre's arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. You cannot leave. We have 200 guests. We have no food. We have no music. You cannot just walk out. It is a breach of contract. Pierre pulled his arm away from her grasp with a look of distaste. He opened the portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He held it up for her to see. Raid Clause 14 Section B, Mrs. Cole. Service is provided at the sole discretion of the proprietor, Mr. Bernard Sutton. The waiver of fees is contingent upon the continued presence and approval of the proprietor. Should the proprietor be asked to vacate the premises, all services are immediately terminated and the facility must be cleared of non-personnel. Pierre snapped the portfolio shut. You evicted the proprietor, madam. You literally kicked the owner out of his own house. I buttoned my jacket. I looked at the sea of stunned faces. I saw the shame on Richard's face. I saw the horror on Jason's face. And I saw the absolute ruin in Brittany's eyes. Pierre, I said, let's go and bring the lobster bisque. I am quite hungry. As I turned to leave, the room erupted into chaos, but I did not look back. I walked toward the doors, and behind me I heard the sound of 50 chairs scraping against the floor as my army followed me out. The scene that unfolded next was something out of a fever dream, or perhaps a military documentary about a tactical retreat. It was the most disciplined display of loyalty I had ever witnessed, and it was devastatingly beautiful. When I walked toward the doors, I did not just leave a room, I initiated a vacuum that sucked the very life out of the party. First, it was the sound that died. The string quartet, which had been providing a soft backdrop of classical music, ceased instantly. The cellist placed a hand over his strings, silencing the vibration. The violinists lowered their bows in perfect unison. There was a collective clicking sound as cases were unlatched and instruments were tucked away into their velvet-lined beds. The harpist threw a heavy cover over her golden instrument and began wheeling it toward the service exit. The sudden absence of music revealed the awkward shuffling of feet and the nervous clearing of throats from the guests who were now standing in a room that felt rapidly colder. Then the movement began. It started at the bar. The 3 bartenders who had been mixing signature cocktails and pouring vintage champagne stopped mid-motion. They did not just stop serving, they began to dismantle the bar. Bottles of Dom Perignon that had been chilling in silver buckets were pulled out, dried off with white towels and placed back into crates. The crystal glasses that were lined up on the counter were swept into racks. One guest, a wealthy cousin of Brittany named Marcus, actually reached out for a glass of scotch that had just been poured. The bartender, a man named Elias, who had worked for me for 15 years, gently but firmly moved the glass out of reach. He poured the amber liquid into a waste bucket right in front of Marcus's eyes. "I am sorry, sir," Elias said, his voice flat and professional. "The bar is closed." On the floor, the 50 waitstaff members moved like a school of fish changing direction. They were carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres, miniature crab cakes, and truffle arancini. They did not offer them to the guests. They turned on their heels and marched back toward the kitchen. I watched as a woman in a sequined dress reached for a napkin from a passing waiter's tray. The waiter stepped back, dodging her hand, as if she were contagious, and continued his march to the exit. They were stripping the tables. The silverware was gathered up with a clattering chime. The linen napkins were pulled from laps. The centerpieces, which were elaborate towers of white orchids and hydrangeas, were lifted by the center staff and carried away. It was a visual dismantling of the wedding. The illusion of luxury was being packed into boxes before their very eyes. The head chef, Jean-Luc, was true to his word. Through the swinging kitchen doors, I could see the line cooks untying their aprons. They folded them neatly and placed them on the stainless steel counters. The sous chefs were wrapping the trays of filet mignon and lobster tails in plastic. The ovens were turned off. The flames on the stovetops died out. The smell of searing meat and rich sauces began to fade, replaced by the sterile scent of a kitchen shutting down for the night. Brittany stood in the center of this collapsing empire, spinning in circles. Her face was a mask of sheer panic that was quickly hardening into hysterical rage. She watched the musicians leave. She watched the food disappear. She watched the wine vanish. She ran toward a group of waiters who were carrying out the main course. "Stop!" she screamed, throwing her arms out to block their path. "Stop right now. You cannot take the food. It is plated. It is ready. Put it down. Put it on the tables." The waiters did not even make eye contact with her. They simply navigated around her, their faces impassive. They flowed around her like water around a stone, ignoring her screaming presence entirely. Brittany grabbed a waiter by the arm. He was a young man holding a tray of soup. "I said stop!" she shrieked, shaking his arm. "I am going to have you fired. I am going to have you all arrested for theft. This is my food. This is my wedding." Pierre stepped in. He moved with a speed that belied his age, gently intervening to separate Brittany from the staff member. He did not touch her, but his presence was enough to make her recoil. "Do not touch the staff," Mrs. Cole, Pierre said, his voice low and dangerous. Brittany turned her fury on him. Her chest was heaving and her eyes were wild. "I am going to sue you. Do you hear me? I am going to sue this entire company. I am going to sue Bernard. I am going to sue every single person in this room. This is breach of contract. We have a signed agreement. My father signed a contract. You cannot just walk out in the middle of the event. I will own this place by the time my lawyers are done with you. I will take everything. I will ruin you." She was screaming so loud that veins were bulging in her neck. Her parents, Richard and Pamela, were standing behind her, nodding vigorously, looking like they were ready to call their legal team right there on the spot. "Yes," Richard bellowed, puffing out his chest. "This is an outrage. We have a binding agreement. You have taken a deposit. Failure to render services is a liability you cannot afford. I know the law. I am a developer. You have made a grave mistake walking away from a paying client." Pierre let them scream. He waited until they had exhausted their threats, until the only sound left in the room was the heavy breathing of the bride and her father. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. It was not the thick leather portfolio from before. It was a single sheet of heavy cream-colored paper. He held it up. It was not a service contract. It was a deed of gift. "There is no contract for services," Pierre said, his voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "There is no binding agreement for catering or venue rental, because there was no transaction." He stepped closer to Richard, forcing him to look at the paper. "Look at the header, Mr. Cole. This is a personal gift agreement. It states that all services, venue usage, food, beverage, and staffing are a personal donation from Mr. Bernard Sutton to his son Jason Sutton. Pierre turned to face the room, addressing the guests who were watching with morbid fascination. The clause at the bottom is standard for Mr. Sutton's personal gifts. It reads, "The provision of these services is contingent upon the donor's presence and goodwill. The donor reserves the right to revoke this gift at any moment, should he feel disrespected, unwelcome, or should he be asked to vacate the premises." Pierre lowered the paper and looked Brittany dead in the eye. "You did not hire a vendor, Mrs. Cole. You accepted a favor, and then you kicked the man doing you the favor out of his own building. There is no breach of contract because there is no contract. There is only a revoked gift. You cannot sue someone for taking back a present you threw in their face." Brittany stared at the paper. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her. She had no legal standing. She had no moral high ground. She had nothing. But Pierre was not done. He signaled to the head of security. "Furthermore, since the gift has been revoked and the host has departed, you are technically trespassing. Mr. Sutton has instructed us to clear the venue. You have 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings and vacate the premises. The gates will be locked at 9 o'clock. Trespassing Richard sputtered, his face turning purple. "This is insane. We have guests. We have presents." "You have 30 minutes, Pierre repeated, checking his watch. "The staff is leaving now. The power to the ballroom will be cut in 15 minutes to facilitate the cleaning crew. I suggest you start packing." The humiliation was absolute. Brittany looked around the room. The tables were bare. The kitchen was dark. The stage was empty. The guests were already grabbing their purses and whispering, checking their phones for Ubers or rushing to their cars to beat the traffic. Her perfect wedding, her aesthetic, her moment of glory had been stripped down to the drywall. I watched all of this from the doorway. I saw my son Jason standing alone near the cake table, which was currently being wheeled away by two sturdy bakers. He looked small. He looked defeated. He looked at me across the room, and for a second I saw him start to move toward me. But then he looked at Brittany, who was now sobbing on the floor, her dress pooled around her like a wilting flower, and he stopped. He chose his side. I turned and walked to the waiting Bentley. The staff was already outside, lining up by the service vans. As I walked down the steps, they stopped talking. They stood at attention, not out of fear, but out of respect. Jean-Luc, the chef, opened the back door of the car for me. "The soup is in the warmer, sir," he said with a wink. I got in. As the car pulled away, I looked back one last time. The lights in the grand ballroom flickered, and then went out, plunging the wedding party into darkness. We drove down the long driveway, followed by a convoy of catering trucks and staff vans, leaving my son and his bride in the dark, with nothing but their pride to keep them warm. The ballroom was now a cavern of echoes. 200 of the city's most influential socialites sat at round tables that had been stripped down to the bare wood. The tablecloths were gone. The silverware was gone. The crystal stemware that had sparkled under the chandeliers just minutes ago was packed away in crates that were currently being loaded onto trucks outside. It was a stark, brutal transformation. It looked less like a wedding reception and more like an abandoned warehouse waiting for demolition. The guests did not know what to do. These were people who had never experienced a moment of deprivation in their lives. They were used to being served, to being entertained, to being fed. Now they sat in their couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos, staring at the empty spaces where their dinner should have been. There was no music to fill the void, only the uncomfortable sound of chairs scraping against the floor as people shifted their weight, and the low, angry murmur of confusion that was spreading like a virus. I saw Mrs. Vanderbilt, a woman who prided herself on her composure, pick up her empty purse and stand up. She looked at the head table where the bride was still weeping on the floor, and she shook her head with a look of profound disdain. She did not say goodbye. She simply turned and walked out, her heels clicking loudly in the silence. Her departure broke the dam. Suddenly, everyone was moving. The illusion was shattered, and the rats were fleeing the sinking ship. Richard and Pamela Cole Brittany's parents were not fleeing. They were cornering their prey. They had recovered from their initial shock and replaced it with a burning white-hot fury. And the target of that fury was my son, Jason. I watched through the glass doors as Richard grabbed Jason by the lapels of his tuxedo. Jason flinched, his hands coming up in a pathetic attempt to defend himself. "You lied to us," Richard roared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You told us he was a mechanic. You told us he lived in a shack. You told us he was nobody." Jason stammered, his face pale and slick with sweat. "I did not know. I knew he had money, but I did not know he owned the company. I did not know he owned this place. He never told me." "He never told you," Pamela shrieked, stepping into the fray. She looked like a vulture circling a carcass. "How could you not know your own father is a tycoon? How could you be so stupid? Do you realize what you have done? You just cost us millions. That man just walked out with the venue, the catering, and the alcohol. Who is going to pay for this? We are not paying for this." Jason looked around wildly, his eyes searching for an exit, searching for a lifeline. He pulled his phone out of his pocket, his fingers trembling so badly he dropped it once before picking it up. He dialed a number. I knew exactly whose number he was dialing. In the back of the Bentley, my phone vibrated silently in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. Jason calling. I looked at the name for a long moment. I remembered the little boy who used to wait for me by the door when I came home from the garage, his face smeared with grease because he wanted to be just like Daddy. I remembered the teenager I taught to drive in the parking lot of my first warehouse. I remembered the young man whose tuition I paid, whose mistakes I covered, whose life I subsidized. And then I looked at the man in the ballroom, the man who had stood silent while his wife called me a beggar. The man who was now only calling me because his world was collapsing, not because he was sorry. I pressed the button on the side of the phone and silenced the call. Then I powered the device off completely. Inside the ballroom, Jason stared at his phone in disbelief. He tried again and again. When he realized I was not going to answer, he slumped. His shoulders collapsed. He looked at Brittany, who was still sobbing, ruining her makeup. He looked at Richard and Pamela, who were now screaming at each other about liability and lawsuits. He looked at the empty tables. He was alone. For the first time in his life, Jason Sutton was completely, utterly alone. I tapped the partition glass. Pierre was sitting in the front seat next to the driver. "Let's go, Pierre," I said. The driver nodded. The engine of the Bentley purred to life, a low rumble that felt like power itself. As we pulled away from the curb, I saw the convoy of trucks falling into line behind us. The catering vans, the equipment trucks, the staff buses. It was an exodus. We were taking the magic with us, leaving behind only the cold, hard reality of an empty room and unpaid bills. I did not look back at the estate. I did not look back at the son who had rejected me. I looked forward into the darkness of the road ahead. The soup was warm. The car was comfortable. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt light. The burden of carrying a family that despised me was gone. I was leaving the chaos behind, and I was taking my dignity with me. The drive back to the city must have been the longest 40 minutes of my son's life. I was not there to witness it, but I can imagine the suffocating silence inside the Uber they eventually had to summon. Their limousine service had been canceled the moment I left the venue because that too was under my corporate account. So there they were, Jason in his tuxedo that suddenly felt like a costume, and Brittany in a $25,000 dress that was now stained with dirt from the parking lot cramped into the back of a smelling sedan driven by a stranger. They were heading toward what they believed was their sanctuary, the penthouse at the Meridian Tower. The Meridian is one of those glass needles that pierce the skyline of the city. It represents everything Jason and Brittany worshipped: exclusivity, height, the ability to look down on the rest of the world. They had been living there for 3 years. They hosted dinner parties there where they bragged about the view. They posted photos of the sunset from the balcony almost daily. They called it their home. They called it their property. But like everything else in their lives, it was a mirage. I was sitting in the library of my own home, a glass of aged scotch in my hand, when my phone buzzed. It was not a call. It was a notification from the security system of the Meridian. Access denied. I took a sip of the scotch and watched the live feed on my tablet. I had access to the building's security cameras not because I was a resident, but because I owned the building. That was another detail Jason had never bothered to ask about. He thought I just knew a guy who got him a good deal on rent. He did not know I was the guy. On the screen, I saw them enter the lobby. Brittany was storming ahead, dragging her heavy dress across the polished marble floor. She looked like a woman on the verge of a psychotic break. She marched straight to the private elevator bank, the one reserved for the penthouse suites. She reached into her clutch and pulled out her key card. It was a heavy black card with a gold chip. She slapped it against the reader. Nothing happened. The light on the panel remained a stubborn, angry red. She hit it again. Harder this time. Beep. Red light. Jason caught up to her, looking exhausted and defeated. He pulled out his own card. He tried it. Beep. Red light. I zoomed in on the image. I could see the confusion on Jason's face morphing into panic. He looked at the card, flipping it over as if he had suddenly forgotten how to use a door. They were tired. They were humiliated. And now they were locked out. Brittany turned and marched toward the concierge desk. The night concierge was a man named Mr. Henderson. He was a former military man, stoic and immovable. I had called Mr. Henderson exactly 20 minutes ago. I had given him a very specific set of instructions. I watched as Brittany slammed her hand onto the marble counter of the concierge desk. "My key is broken," she screamed. "Fix it! We want to go up." Mr. Henderson did not flinch. He did not smile. He did not offer the usual polite greeting. He simply looked up from his computer screen and adjusted his glasses. "I am afraid your keys are not broken, Mrs. Cole," he said, his voice picking up clearly on the lobby microphone. "They have been deactivated." "Deactivated," she shrieked. "What are you talking about? We live here. This is our apartment. Reactivate them right now or I will have your job." Mr. Henderson shook his head slowly. "I cannot do that, ma'am. Access to Penthouse B is restricted to the leaseholder and authorized guests. As of 8 o'clock this evening, all guest passes have been revoked by the owner." Guest passes. The words hung in the air. Jason stepped forward, his face pale. "What do you mean, guest passes?" "I am the tenant. I pay the rent." Mr. Henderson turned his computer screen slightly so they could not see it, but he consulted a file. "Mr. Sutton, you are listed as an occupant under a corporate housing agreement. The leaseholder is Sutton Logistics International. The primary contact for the leaseholder called tonight. He informed us that your occupancy was contingent on employment and good standing, which have apparently been terminated. He instructed us to secure the unit immediately." Jason leaned against the desk, looking like he was going to vomit. He knew. In that moment, the final piece of the puzzle snapped into place for him. He remembered the papers he signed 3 years ago, papers he didn't read because he was too busy admiring the view. He remembered me telling him I would handle the paperwork. He realized that for 3 years he had been living in a company apartment, a perk of being my son. A perk that had just been rescinded. Brittany did not understand. She did not want to understand. "This is illegal," she screamed, grabbing a vase of flowers from the counter and throwing it on the floor. The glass shattered and water pooled on the marble. "You cannot lock us out. All my things are up there. My jewelry, my clothes. Open the door. That is when the revolving doors at the entrance spun open. Two uniformed police officers stepped into the lobby. They did not look like they were there for a social call. They had their hands on their belts and their eyes locked on the woman destroying the lobby. Mr. Henderson nodded to the officers. "Officers, thank you for coming so quickly. We have two individuals attempting to gain unauthorized access to a private residence. They have become belligerent and caused property damage." The officers approached. Jason backed away, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. Brittany stood her ground, her chest heaving. "Ma'am," one of the officers said, his voice calm but authoritative, "you need to step away from the desk." "We live here," she wailed, pointing at the ceiling. "That is my home." "Do you have a lease?" the officer asked. "Can you show me proof of residence?" She looked at Jason. "Show him," she demanded. "Show him the lease." Jason looked at the floor. "I do not have a lease, Brittany." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the officer's radio. Brittany looked at Jason with pure hatred. "You do not have a lease. You told me you bought it. You told me we owned it." "I said I took care of it," Jason whispered. The officer stepped closer. "Sir, ma'am, if you do not have a lease and the building management has asked you to leave, you are trespassing. You need to vacate the premises immediately, or we will have to place you under arrest." "But my things," Brittany cried. "I am wearing a wedding dress." "Where am I supposed to go?" "That is a civil matter," the officer said. "You can contact the owner tomorrow to arrange for the collection of your personal effects. But tonight, you cannot stay here. You need to leave. Now." I watched from my library as my son took his wife's arm. She shook him off violently. She looked at him with disgust. She walked toward the door alone, her dress trailing through the spilled water and broken glass on the floor. Jason followed her, his head hung low. They walked out of the luxury tower they had built their identity around. They walked out onto the street where the wind was blowing, and the reality of their new life was waiting for them. They had nowhere to go. Their credit cards were in my name. Their car was leased through my company. Their home was my property. They stood on the sidewalk looking up at the penthouse windows, which were dark and cold. I reached for the phone and dialed Mr. Henderson's direct line. Mr. Henderson speaking. "Good evening, Mr. Henderson," I said. "I saw the commotion on the feed. I apologize for the mess. Please have the cleaning crew take care of the lobby and bill the damages to my personal account. And Mr. Henderson changed the locks on the penthouse tonight. Just in case." "Of course, Mr. Sutton." Mr. Henderson replied. "It is already done." I hung up the phone. I finished my scotch. I felt a pang of sadness, not for the punishment I was inflicting, but for the necessity of it. I had created a monster by shielding Jason from the world. I had let him believe he was a king when he was merely a prince living in a castle I built. Now he was going to learn what it meant to build his own shelter. He was going to learn that when the lights go out, you have to find your own way in the dark. And tonight, for Jason and Brittany, it was going to be a very long, very dark night. I did not sleep that night, but I found a strange comfort in the silence of my home, a home that was finally just mine again. While I sat in my study reviewing the quarterly reports for my logistics empire, my son and his bride were waking up to a reality that was far harsher than any nightmare they could have dreamt. They had spent their wedding night not in the Italian silk sheets of the penthouse, but on the scratchy polyester of a roadside motel on the outskirts of the city. I knew exactly where they were because I had tracked the location of Jason's phone before I cut the service. They had checked into the Starlight Motel, a place where the neon sign buzzed incessantly, and the hourly rates attracted a clientele very different from the social circle Brittany aspired to join. At 9 o'clock sharp, my attorney, Mr. Arthur Cohen, pulled his pristine Mercedes into the cracked asphalt parking lot of the motel. Arthur has been my legal counsel for 30 years. He is a man who smiles rarely and never when he is working. To Arthur, emotions are inefficiencies, and today he was there to be extremely efficient. I had given him full authority to execute what we called the severance protocol. I can only imagine the scene inside room 12. The air conditioning unit rattling in the window, the smell of stale tobacco and cheap cleaner permeating the air. Jason likely waking up with a headache that throbbed behind his eyes, realizing that his tuxedo was wrinkled beyond repair. Brittany sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at her ruined manicure, still wearing the remnants of her wedding makeup, her $25,000 dress balled up in the corner like a pile of dirty laundry. When Arthur knocked on the door, it was not a polite tap. It was the heavy, authoritative knock of a process server. Jason opened the door. He looked like a ghost. His eyes were red, his hair was a mess, and he was still wearing his dress shirt, though it was unbuttoned and stained. When he saw Arthur standing there in a three-piece Italian suit contrasting sharply with the peeling paint of the motel door, Jason's shoulders slumped. He knew Arthur. He knew that Arthur did not make house calls for pleasant chit-chat. Mr. Cohen-Shawson croaked, his voice rough from sleep and stress. "What are you doing here?" Arthur did not wait to be invited in. He stepped into the cramped room, his polished shoes avoiding a suspicious stain on the carpet. He held a briefcase in one hand and a tablet in the other. He looked at Jason and then at Brittany, who was huddled under the thin bedspread, looking terrified and furious all at once. "Good morning, Jason, Mrs. Cole," Arthur said. "I am here on behalf of Mr. Sutton to formalize the changes to your living arrangements and financial status." Brittany sat up, wrapping the sheet around herself. "Tell him to call us. Tell Bernard he cannot just lock us out of our home. We are going to sue him for illegal eviction." Arthur placed his briefcase on the small wobbly table by the window. He opened it with a decisive click. He did not look at Brittany. He addressed Jason. "There is no illegal eviction, Jason, because, as you know, you were never a tenant. You were a guest in corporate housing. That privilege has been revoked due to conduct detrimental to the company's reputation." Arthur pulled a stack of documents from the briefcase. He laid them out on the table. "This is the formal notice to vacate. You have 24 hours to arrange with the building management to retrieve your personal effects. Anything left after that window will be placed in storage at your expense. If you attempt to enter the property without a security escort, you will be charged with trespassing." Jason rubbed his face with his hands. "Arthur, please. We have nowhere to go. We have no money. The cards aren't working." "That brings me to the next item," Arthur said, his tone flat and professional. He pulled out a list. It was a list of account numbers. The American Express Platinum, the Visa Signature, the MasterCard Black. All of these cards were supplementary cards issued under Mr. Sutton's primary account. They have been canceled, effective immediately. The outstanding balances, which I believe total close to $40,000 for the wedding expenses alone, will be absorbed by Mr. Sutton as a parting gift. However, you are now personally liable for any pending charges that have not yet cleared." Brittany scrambled out of bed. She was wearing a hotel bathrobe she must have stolen from a previous trip. "You cannot do that. How are we supposed to eat? How are we supposed to pay for a hotel? We are broke." Arthur finally looked at her. He adjusted his glasses. "That is not my client's concern, Mrs. Cole. You are both able-bodied adults. I assume you have your own personal savings or income sources." The room went silent. They did not have personal savings. They did not have income sources that could support them for a week, let alone a lifetime. They had spent every penny they earned and every penny I gave them on maintaining an illusion. Arthur checked his watch. He had a schedule to keep. Now, regarding the vehicle, Jason looked up sharply. "The Range Rover." "No." "Arthur, you cannot take the car. It is my car. I drive it every day." Arthur shook his head. "You operate it, Jason. You do not own it. The Range Rover is a fleet vehicle leased by Sutton Logistics. It is assigned to executive staff. Since you are not and have never been executive staff, your authorization to operate the vehicle is void." Jason rushed to the window and pulled back the curtain. Outside in the parking lot, a tow truck was backing up to the black Range Rover. A man in a jumpsuit was already hooking chains to the undercarriage. "Stop them!" Jason yelled, banging on the glass. "Stop them right now. My golf clubs are in there. Brittany's luggage is in there. The retrieval team has been instructed to box any personal items found in the vehicle and leave them at the front desk of this establishment," Arthur said. "You can pick them up after I leave." Brittany screamed, a high, piercing sound of pure frustration. She lunged at Arthur, grabbing the lapels of his expensive jacket. "You evil old man! You and Bernard are monsters. We are family. You cannot treat family like this. Give me the keys. Give me the credit cards." Arthur did not shove her. He simply stepped back, removing her hands from his suit with a look of distaste. He signaled to the open door where two large men in dark suits had appeared. "My personal security detail." I had sent them with Arthur not because I thought Jason was dangerous, but because I knew Brittany was volatile. "Do not touch me again, Mrs. Cole," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, "or I will add assault charges to your current list of problems." He turned back to the table and placed one final envelope on top of the eviction notice. "This is the final document. It is a cease and desist order. You are to make no contact with Mr. Sutton. You are not to come to his residence. You are not to come to his offices. You are not to call, text, or email. Any attempt to contact him will be considered harassment, and we will seek a restraining order." Jason was staring out the window, watching the Range Rover being lifted into the air. The symbol of his status, the car he used to impress his friends, was being towed away like a piece of junk. He turned to look at Arthur, tears streaming down his face. "Arthur," he whispered, "ask him. Ask my dad why he is doing this. Ask him if he hates me." Arthur paused. He closed his briefcase. He looked at Jason not as a lawyer, but as a man who had watched him grow up. "He does not hate you, Jason. He is disappointed in you. He gave you the world, and you stood by and watched while he was treated like a beggar. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." Arthur walked to the door. He stopped and looked back at the couple standing in the wreckage of their life. The room smelled of despair. "I suggest you check out by 11, Arthur added. "I do not believe Mr. Sutton is covering this bill for this room." He walked out and closed the door. From my study, I watched the GPS tracker on the Range Rover moving across the map, heading back to the company garage. I saw the notification that the credit cards had been successfully deactivated. I saw the confirmation from the process server. It was done. They were stripped bare. No home, no car, no money. Just a suitcase of clothes and a marriage built on a foundation of greed that was already starting to crack. I sat in silence, but I did not feel triumph. I felt a heavy, hollow ache in my chest. It is a terrible thing to break your own child, but sometimes you have to break the bone to reset it correctly. Jason had never known a day of want in his life. He had never felt the panic of an empty bank account. He had never felt the cold wind of uncertainty. Now he would feel it all. And I prayed that in that cold wind, he would finally find the man he was supposed to be. But for now, he was just a boy who had lost his toys, standing in a cheap motel room, with a woman who was realizing she had married a pauper, not a prince. Arthur Cohen is a man who believes in completeness. He does not like loose ends, and he certainly does not like leaving a job half-finished. As he stood with his hand on the doorknob of that wretched motel room, he paused. The sound of the tow truck dragging the Range Rover away outside was a low, grinding hum that vibrated through the thin walls. He looked at Brittany, who was currently screaming at Jason about how he needed to fix this, how he needed to demand his rights. She was operating under the delusion that Jason was a fallen prince, a successful businessman who had been temporarily inconvenienced by a tyrannical father. She thought she had married potential. Arthur knew it was time to kill that illusion too. He turned back around his leather shoes, pivoting on the stained carpet. He walked back to this wobbly table where Jason was slumped, his head in his hands. Arthur reached into his briefcase one last time. He pulled out a thick, bound document. It was not a legal notice. It was a forensic accounting report. It was the autopsy of Jason Sutton's financial life. "There is one final matter," Arthur said, his voice cutting through Brittany's tirade like a knife through silk. "A matter of clarification." Brittany spun around, her mascara running down her cheeks in black rivulets. "What now?" she spat. "Are you going to take his clothes too? Are you going to take his watch?" Arthur placed the document on the table with a heavy thud. "Mrs. Cole, you seem to be under the impression that Mr. Sutton is cutting off a successful entrepreneur. You seem to believe that Jason's lifestyle, the apartment, the car, the dinners was funded by his own business acumen." "Of course it was," Brittany snapped, moving to stand beside Jason, protective but wary. "Jason is an investor. He runs a hedge fund. He manages assets. He told me he made $200,000 last year alone." Jason made a noise, a small, strangled whimper. He did not look up. He knew what was in that binder. He knew that the lie he had been feeding her for 3 years, the lie he had been feeding himself, was about to be exposed under the harsh fluorescent light of room 12. Arthur opened the binder. He pointed to the first page, a summary sheet highlighted in yellow. "Jason does not run a hedge fund, Mrs. Cole." Arthur said, his tone devoid of judgment. Just cold, hard facts. "Jason runs a deficit." He flipped the page. "This is a record of Jason's trading activity for the last 5 years. As you can see, he does not invest. He gambles. High-risk cryptocurrency futures. Online sports betting. High-stakes poker games in underground clubs downtown." Brittany looked at the page. She saw columns of red numbers. -5,000. -12,000. -20,000. "That is a mistake," she whispered. "He told me he was diversifying. He told me these were capital losses for tax purposes." "They are losses," Arthur corrected. "But there is no capital." He flipped to the next section. "Currently, Jason carries a personal debt load of $85,000. This is money owed not to banks but to private individuals. Bookies, loan sharks, people who do not send letters when you miss a payment." Brittany took a step back from the table. She looked at Jason. Her eyes were wide, searching his face for a denial. "Jason, say something. Tell him he is lying. Tell him about your portfolio. Show him your accounts." Jason did not move. He could not move. The weight of his shame pinned him to the chair. Arthur continued, relentless. "For the past 5 years, Mr. Bernard Sutton has been quietly settling these debts. Every time Jason maxed out a credit card, your father-in-law paid it off. Every time Jason lost 10 grand on a football game, Mr. Sutton covered the spread. Mr. Sutton did this to protect his son from the consequences of his addiction. He did it to keep Jason out of jail and out of the hospital. He effectively purchased Jason's reputation." Arthur looked directly at Brittany. "The man you married, Mrs. Cole, is not a millionaire. He is a liability. He has 0 assets. He has 0 income. And as of this morning, he has 0 safety net. The lifestyle you enjoyed, the restaurants you ate at, the clothes you are wearing right now were not paid for by Jason's success. They were paid for by Mr. Sutton's mercy. And that mercy has run out." Brittany stared at the binder. She reached out a trembling hand and turned a page. She saw the transfers. Monthly deposits from Sutton Logistics covering rent. Wire transfers covering credit card bills. It was all there in black and white. The man she thought was a titan of industry was actually a remittance man, a child living on an allowance. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to stop. Brittany looked at Jason. The look on her face changed. It went from anger to horror, and then to something much colder. It was the look of a shopper realizing she had bought a counterfeit bag. It was the look of a predator realizing the prey was already dead. "You lied to me," she whispered. Her voice was trembling, but not with sadness, with rage. "You told me you were a partner. You told me you built that portfolio." "I tried." Jason choked out, finally looking up. His eyes were wet and pleading. "I almost had it, Britt. I had a system. I was going to make it back. One big score and I would have paid Dad back. I just needed more time." "You are a loser," she screamed. The word tore out of her throat, raw and ugly. "You are a broke, pathetic loser. I married you because you said you could take care of me. I married you because you said you were different from the other trust fund idiots. But you are worse. You are a fraud." She grabbed the binder and threw it at him. The pages scattered across the room, fluttering down like dead leaves. $85,000 in debt," she shrieked. "And you have nothing. No job, no money, no house." She looked around the motel room, her eyes wild. She looked at the peeling wallpaper, the stained carpet, the cheap television bolted to the dresser. "This is it, isn't it? This is what you have to offer me. A motel room and a mountain of debt." Jason stood up, reaching for her. "Baby, please. We can figure this out. I can get a job. I can work. Dad will come around. He always comes around. He just needs to cool off." "He is not coming around," Arthur interjected quietly. "Not this time. Mr. Sutton has made it very clear. The Bank of Bernard is closed permanently." Brittany recoiled from Jason's touch as if he had burned her. She backed up until she hit the wall. She looked at Arthur, and then she looked at her husband. She saw the truth now. She saw the weak chin, the desperate eyes, the soft hands that had never done a day of real work. She saw the man I had seen for years, the man I had tried to hide from the world. "You tricked me," she hissed. "You and your father. You tricked me into this. You let me think I was marrying into a dynasty, and you trapped me in a nightmare." She grabbed her purse from the bed. She rifled through it, pulling out her phone. She looked at the screen. No service. Of course. The plan had been canceled. She threw the phone on the bed. "I am leaving," she announced. Jason froze. "Leaving? Where are you going?" "We are married, Britt. We just got married yesterday." "I am getting an annulment," she said, her voice cold and hard. "Fraud is grounds for annulment. And this," she gestured at him at the scattered papers. "This is the biggest fraud I have ever seen. I am going to my parents' house. And do not follow me. Do not call me. If I see you again, I will call the police." Brittany, Jason pleaded, falling to his knees. "Please, I love you. Do not leave me here. I have nothing without you. You have nothing with me either," she spat. She walked to the door. She stopped in front of Arthur. She looked him up and down, her eyes filled with venom. "Tell Bernard he wins," she said. "He wanted to show me Jason was worthless. Well, congratulations. I see it now." She slammed the door behind her. The sound echoed in the small room. Jason stayed on his knees amidst the scattered papers of his financial ruin. He was weeping openly now, the deep, racking sobs of a child who has been abandoned. Arthur watched him for a moment. He felt no pity, only a grim sense of completion. He bent down and picked up the empty binder, placing it back in his briefcase. "Goodbye," Jason Arthur said. He walked out into the bright morning sun, leaving my son alone in the wreckage of his own making. The tow truck was gone. The parking lot was empty. Arthur got into his Mercedes and drove away. Back in my study, I closed the file on my desk. The final report from Arthur had just come in via text. Delivery complete. Subject isolated. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window at the vast estate that Jason would never inherit. The silence in the house was heavy, but it was clean. The rot had been cut out. The parasite had been removed. Jason was now facing the world naked and alone with $85,000 of debt and a broken heart. It was a cruel lesson. Perhaps the cruelest I could teach. But as I sat there, I knew it was the only one that might save him. He had hit rock bottom. Now he would either learn to climb, or he would stay there forever. The choice for the first time in his life was entirely his. The silence in my study was deceptive. It was the heavy, static silence that precedes a tornado. I knew Brittany Cole. I knew that a woman who screams about lawsuits when she has no case does not simply retreat into the night. She was cornered. She was humiliated. She was broke. And a cornered animal does not negotiate, it bites. I just did not expect the bite to be quite so venomous or quite so public. It began at 2 in the afternoon, just 4 hours after Arthur Cohen had left them at the motel. Pierre walked into my library without knocking. Pierre never enters without knocking. His face, usually a mask of professional detachment, was pale. He held a tablet in his hands, and his knuckles were white. Sir Pierre said, his voice tight, "You need to see this. It is trending. Everywhere." He placed the tablet on my desk. It was open to a social media live stream. The view counter was climbing so fast, the numbers were a blur. 50,000, 100,000, 200,000. On the screen sat Brittany. She was no longer in the cheap motel room. She was sitting on a beige sofa in her parents' living room, the same room where Richard had once bragged to me about his golf handicap. She was wearing an oversized gray sweatshirt that looked 3 sizes too big, making her look small and fragile. Her hair was messy, pulled back into a loose bun, with strands falling across her face. She was not wearing makeup. Her eyes were red and puffy. It was a masterclass in staging. She looked like a survivor. She looked like a victim. She sniffled, wiping her nose with the sleeve of the sweatshirt. The comments section on the side of the screen was scrolling so fast, it was unreadable, a waterfall of heart emojis and angry faces. "Hi, guys," she whispered, her voice cracking perfectly. "I did not want to do this. I wanted to keep this private. But after what happened yesterday, after what he did to me, I cannot stay silent anymore. I have to speak my truth." She took a shaky breath and looked directly into the camera lens. "Everyone is asking why the wedding was canceled. Everyone is asking why Jason and I were kicked out of our home. There are rumors that it was about money. That is what he wants you to believe. That is the narrative he is paying lawyers to spread." She paused, letting the suspense build. But it was not about money. It was never about money. It was about power. And it was about boundaries. I leaned forward in my chair. What was she doing? "Bernard Sutton," she said, saying my name with a shudder of revulsion. "My father-in-law. He has always been inappropriate with me. He would make comments about my body. He would touch my shoulder a little too long. I tried to ignore it. I tried to be nice because he was Jason's dad. But yesterday, right before the ceremony, he came into the bridal suite. I froze. I had not been near the bridal suite. I had been sitting at table 19 the entire time. He told me..." She started to sob, covering her face with her hands. "He told me that since he was paying for everything, since he owned the house, I owed him. He tried to force himself on me. The lie was so monstrous, so absolute, that for a moment I could not breathe." She continued through her tears. "I pushed him away. I screamed. I told him I would tell Jason, and that is when he snapped. He told me that if I did not do what he wanted, he would ruin us. He said he would take the apartment, take the car, take everything. He said he would make sure Jason never had a dime. I stood up to him. I kicked him out of the room. That is why I yelled at him at the reception. I was protecting myself. I was defending my honor." She looked at the camera, her eyes wide and pleading. "And he did it. He made good on his threat. He kicked us out on our wedding night. He stranded us. He took our car. He left us with nothing, just because I said no to him. Just because I would not let him use me." The comments section exploded. Monster. Predator. We believe you, Brittany. Kill him. Burn his house down. She wiped her eyes again. Please share this. Please do not let men like Bernard Sutton get away with this. He thinks his money can buy my silence. But I am not for sale. The live stream ended. The screen went black, but the damage was already radiating out into the digital world like a nuclear shockwave. Within an hour, the hashtag Justice for Brittany was the #1 trending topic in the country. My face, taken from old business profiles, was plastered across every platform. I was no longer the respected tycoon Bernard Sutton. I was the creepy billionaire who preyed on his son's wife. Pierre looked at me, his expression grim. Sir, the legal team is already drafting a defamation suit. We can have a cease and desist issued within the hour. It won't matter, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. The court of public opinion does not wait for evidence, Pierre. She has given them a villain. They want blood. And they came for it. By 6 o'clock, the first news vans were parked at the bottom of my driveway. The reporters were kept back by the iron gates, but their cameras were pointed at the house, zooming in on the windows, hoping to catch a glimpse of the monster. By 8 o'clock, the mob arrived. It started with a few cars honking as they drove by. Then people began to gather on the sidewalk. They held homemade signs. Protect women. Eat the rich. Sutton is a predator. They were young, mostly people who had seen the video on their phones and felt the righteous indignation of the uninformed. They did not know Brittany. They did not know me. They only knew the story she had told them, a story of a poor girl crushed by a powerful man. It was a story designed to trigger every protective instinct in society, and she had weaponized it perfectly. I stood by the window in the darkened library watching them. My security team was stationed at the gate, but there were too many people. The crowd was growing agitated. Someone threw a bottle. It smashed against the brick pillar of the gate. The sound of breaking glass was met with cheers. Then came the rocks. The first one hit the second-story window of the guest bedroom. It shattered the pane with a loud crash that echoed through the silent house. Then another, and another. The sound of glass breaking is a violent, visceral noise. It triggers a primal fear. Pierre rushed into the room. Sir, you need to move away from the window. They are breaching the perimeter fence. The police are on their way, but we need to get you to the safe room. I did not move. I watched a brick sail over the gate and land on the hood of the Bentley parked in the drive. They were destroying my property. They were calling for my head. And somewhere in the suburbs, Brittany Cole was watching this on her phone, smiling. She thought she had played the ultimate card. She thought that by destroying my reputation, she could force me to settle. She thought I would pay her millions just to make it stop. She had underestimated me again. She thought I was playing defense. She did not know that I had been playing offense since the moment she walked into my life. Let them throw rocks, Pierre, I said. Let them scream. Let them break the windows. Pierre looked at me as if I had lost my mind. Sir, this is dangerous. No, Pierre, I said, turning to face him. This is evidence. Every rock they throw, every threat they scream, every lie she tells is just adding zeros to the settlement she will never see. She wants a war. She thinks she has nuked me. But she forgot one thing. I walked over to the large painting on the wall behind my desk. I reached behind the frame and pressed a small, hidden button. A panel in the wall slid open, revealing a bank of servers and monitors. This was the heart of my security system. Brittany forgot that I made my fortune in logistics, I said. And the first rule of logistics is tracking. You always know where your package is, and you always know who touched it. I typed a command into the keyboard. On the central monitor, a video file opened. It was time-stamped from yesterday afternoon. It was footage from the high-definition cameras I had installed in every room of the Oakhaven estate, including the private bridal waiting room. I had installed them not to spy, but for liability. When you own a venue worth millions, you protect it. I watched the screen. I saw Brittany pacing in the room. I saw Jason sitting on the sofa looking miserable. I saw her talking to him. I turned up the volume. Her voice came through, crisp and clear. We are going to take him for everything she was saying on the screen. Once we are married, I am going to put him in a home. The cheapest, nastiest nursing home I can find. I don't care if he is healthy. I will tell everyone he is senile. I will tell everyone he is attacking me. We will declare him incompetent and take power of attorney. And then, Jason, we will sell this dump and buy a yacht. I paused the video. The face on the screen was twisted with greed and malice. It was the face of the real monster. She accused me of harassment, I said to Pierre. She accused me of the one thing that destroys a man instantly. She lit the match. I looked at the window as another rock smashed through the glass, showering the rug with shards. Pierre, call Arthur. Tell him to get the press release ready. We are not just going to sue her for defamation. We are going to incinerate her narrative. And Pierre, yes, sir. Download the footage from the bridal suite. And download the footage from the hallway cameras, too. The ones that show I was nowhere near that room at the time she claims I attacked her. I looked back at the mob outside. They were angry because they believed a lie. In the morning, I would give them the truth, and the truth would turn that anger right back onto the woman who had started the fire. Brittany Cole wanted to be famous. I was about to make her the most famous woman in America, but not for the reasons she hoped. The steam rising from my cup of Lapsang Souchong tea was the only thing moving in the library. Outside the heavy velvet curtains, the world was screaming. I could hear the distant wail of sirens approaching to disperse the mob and the rhythmic chanting of strangers who believed they were fighting for justice. Inside, however, the air was still and scented with pine smoke and old leather. I lifted the porcelain cup to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. It was perfectly brewed. Pierre stood by the desk, his posture rigid, his eyes darting between me and the window. He was vibrating with a nervous energy that was entirely foreign to his usual composure. He wanted to do something. He wanted to issue a statement. He wanted to call the mayor. He wanted to put out the fire. Sit down, Pierre. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You are making the tea nervous. Pierre looked at me as if I were mad. Sir, with all due respect, they are destroying your reputation. The stock price of Sutton Logistics has already dropped 2 points in after-hours trading. The board is calling. The press is camping on the lawn. We need to respond. We need to deny this. I placed the cup back on its saucer with a gentle clink. I picked up the remote control and rewound the live stream on the large monitor. I froze the image on Brittany's face right at the moment she claimed I had touched her. I studied it. I looked at the way her eyes shifted to the left, a classic tell of improvisation. I looked at the way she wrung her hands, a gesture she had practiced to evoke sympathy. It was a performance and a good one, but it was lacking in one critical element. Truth. Denial is for the guilty, Pierre, I said, keeping my eyes on the screen. If I deny it, I validate it. I make it a debate. I make it, he said, she said. And in the court of public opinion, the rich old man always loses that debate. No, we do not deny. We dismantle. I swiveled my chair around to face the wall of monitors. Most people think I am just a retired businessman who got lucky with trucks. They do not know that the logistics business is 90% information warfare. You have to know where every container is every second of the day. You have to know which drivers are stealing fuel. You have to know which competitors are bribing customs officials. Paranoia is not a pathology in my line of work. It is a prerequisite for survival. I tapped a key and the screen changed. It showed a grid of 12 different camera angles. Do you know why I installed this system, Pierre? I asked. Pierre shook his head. For security, sir. For thieves. I laughed a dry, humorless sound. No. I installed this system 3 years ago on the very first day Jason brought Brittany home for dinner. I leaned back, remembering that night. She had walked into my home and I saw it instantly. Most guests look at the art on the walls or the view from the window. Brittany looked at the price tags. I saw her lift the corner of a Persian rug to check the weave, not out of appreciation, but to estimate its auction value. I saw her check the hallmark on the silver cutlery. I saw her looking at me not as a future father-in-law, but as an expiration date. She was casing the joint Pierre. She was an appraiser calculating her inheritance. And I knew right then that a woman like that would eventually try to take what she could not wait to inherit. So I wired the house. Not just the perimeter. Every room, every hallway, every corner. High-definition audio and video. Cloud storage on a private server in Zurich. I turned my home into a black box recorder because I knew that one day the plane was going to crash, and I wanted to know exactly who was flying it into the mountain. I pointed to the screen where Brittany's frozen face was still weeping fake tears. She thinks she is the director of this movie, I said. She thinks she is writing the script. She does not realize she is just an actor on a surveillance tape. I looked at the timestamps on the file Pierre had downloaded. It was the footage from the bridal suite hallway. It was timestamped exactly at the time Brittany claimed I was assaulting her. I stood up and walked over to the console. I felt a surge of cold adrenaline. This was the moment. The trap had been set years ago, and she had walked right into it with her eyes wide open, blinded by her own greed. She had accused me of a crime that never happened in a room I never entered at a time when I was visibly sitting in front of 200 witnesses. But witnesses can be unreliable. Video is absolute. I turned to Pierre. The fear in his eyes had been replaced by understanding. He realized now that we were not under siege. We were lying in wait. Pierre, I said, it is time. Activate trap number 2. Pierre nodded. He stepped forward and typed in his authorization code. The system hummed. Upload the footage from the bridal suite, I commanded. But do not just send it to the lawyers. Send it to the news stations. Send it to the social media aggregators. Send it to the very platforms where she is currently playing the victim. Title it The Truth About the Bridal Suite. Pierre hit enter. The progress bar on the screen filled up rapidly. Green, 100%, upload complete. I walked back to my desk and picked up my tea. It was still warm. Now we wait, I said. I watched the monitor. I watched the comments on Brittany's video. For a moment, nothing changed. The hate continued to flow. The threats continued to scroll. And then it started. A trickle at first. Someone posted a link. Then another. Then someone commented, "Wait, have you seen the other video?" The tide began to turn. It was not a wave, it was a tsunami. The footage we had just released showed the bridal suite door. It showed Brittany pacing alone. It showed Jason entering. It showed them talking. And crucially, it showed the hallway outside where I was nowhere to be seen. But the audio. The audio was the nail in the coffin. The microphones in the room were sensitive. They picked up every word of her plot. Every venomous syllable of her plan to frame me, to institutionalize me, to steal my fortune. I watched as the view count on my video surpassed hers. I watched as the comments on her live stream stopped being supportive and started becoming questions. Then accusations. Then rage. The mob outside my window went quiet. The chanting stopped. They were checking their phones. The truth was spreading through the crowd like a virus. I took another sip of tea. It tasted like victory. Brittany Cole had wanted the world's attention. She had wanted to be the star of the show. Well, she was the star now. We had just broadcast her true nature to the world in high definition. She thought she could use the internet to destroy me. She forgot that the internet loves a villain, but it loves exposing a liar even more. I looked at Pierre. He was smiling a small, tight smile. "Should I call the police now, sir?" he asked. "To clear the driveway?" "No," I said. "Let them stay. They are about to realize they are throwing rocks at the wrong house. And when they realize that, they are going to want to know where Brittany lives." I sat back and watched the digital fire I had just lit. It was going to burn bright, and it was going to burn hot. And Brittany Cole was standing right in the center of it, doused in the gasoline of her own lies. The file I was about to release was heavy, not just in digital gigabytes, but in moral weight. It was the weaponization of truth in its purest form. I sat in my leather chair, the light from the monitors reflecting in my eyes, and I felt a strange sense of detachment. I was about to destroy 2 lives. One was a stranger who had invaded my home with malice in her heart. The other was my own flesh and blood. But as I looked at the freeze frame of Jason's face on the screen, the face of a man who had chosen a woman over his father, I realized he had destroyed himself long before I pressed this button. I was merely writing the obituary for a relationship that had died years ago. Pierre stood beside me, his hand hovering over the keyboard. "Are you ready, sir?" I nodded. "Do it." Pierre pressed enter. The file labeled Bridal Suite Interior Audiovisual synced with the global servers. It hit the news feeds. It hit the social media aggregators. It hit the inboxes of the millions of people currently debating whether I was a monster or a victim. The internet, which had been a roaring fire of hatred toward me, suddenly held its breath. The video opened with a wide shot of the bridal suite at Oakhaven. It was a beautiful room filled with antique furniture and soft lighting, designed to be a sanctuary for a bride on her special day. Brittany was standing in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting her veil. She looked like an angel. She looked perfect. But then she opened her mouth, and the illusion shattered instantly. Jason was sitting on the velvet settee, his head in his hands. He looked miserable. "Can we just get through this?" Brittany was saying, her voice sharp and devoid of the tearful tremble she had used in her live stream. "I am sick of looking at his old face. He smells like mothballs and cheap soap." Jason looked up. "He is my dad, Britt. He is paying for everything." Brittany spun around, her dress swirling around her. "He is not paying, Jason. He is providing. There is a difference. He is letting us use his space because he feels guilty for being a loser his whole life. But that ends today. Once that marriage certificate is signed, we are taking control. Control of what?" Jason asked, sounding weary. "He does not have anything." Brittany laughed. It was a cold, calculating sound. "You are so naive. He has the house. He has the land. He has the pension. And I have been doing some digging. I found his insurance policies. The old man is worth more dead than alive, but he is worth plenty alive if we manage him right." She walked over to Jason and grabbed his face in her hands, her nails dug into his skin. "Listen to me. Tomorrow morning we are filing the paperwork. We are going to declare him incompetent. I have already looked into facilities. There is a state-run place 2 towns over. It is cheap, it is dirty, and it smells like urine. It is perfect. We dump him there, we take power of attorney, and we sell the cottage. We sell the land. We liquidate everything." Jason pulled back slightly. "A state home." "Britt, that is harsh. Can we not find somewhere nice?" "Nice costs money," she snapped. "We need the money for us. We need it for the penthouse. We need it for the boat. Do you want to live the life we talked about? Or do you want to spend your inheritance keeping a vegetable comfortable?" "He is useless, Jason. He is a burden. He is just taking up space and oxygen." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And if he resists, I will tell everyone he hit me. I will tell everyone he is a pervert. Who are they going to believe? The pretty young bride or the senile old mechanic? I will ruin him, Jason. I will make sure he dies alone and forgotten. The video zoomed in on Jason's face. This was the moment. This was the turning point. This was where he could have stood up. He could have said no. He could have defended me. He could have shown a shred of the character I tried to instill in him. Instead, Jason sighed. He looked at her, and then he looked at the floor. Okay, he said softly. Just make sure it is quick. I do not want to deal with the drama. Just get it done so we can get the money. Brittany smiled and kissed him on the forehead. Good boy. Now fix your tie. We have a show to put on. The video ended. The silence in my library was absolute. But outside in the digital world, the explosion was nuclear. The reaction was instantaneous. The millions of people who had rallied behind Brittany, who had championed her as a survivor, who had attacked me with rocks and threats, were now watching the raw, unedited footage of her soul. They saw the greed. They heard the cruelty. They saw the premeditation. And worst of all, they saw the betrayal of a son who sold his father for a promise of a yacht. The comments on the live stream, which had been frozen in shock, suddenly began to move again. But the tone had shifted violently. She is a sociopath, one comment read. Look at the son, he just agreed to lock his dad away. Another wrote, this is elder abuse. This is criminal. Arrest them both. The hashtag Justice for Brittany vanished within minutes, replaced by Justice for Bernard. The mob outside my gate, which had been chanting and throwing stones, grew quiet. I walked to the window and looked out. I saw people lowering their signs. I saw people checking their phones, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of the screens showing the video I had just released. I saw confusion turning into shame. They realized they had been weaponized. They realized they had been fighting for the villain. Slowly, the crowd began to disperse. People walked away, their heads down. The news vans, however, did not leave. They started their engines and turned around. They were no longer pointing their cameras at my house. They were heading to the suburbs. They were heading to Richard and Pamela's house. They were heading to find the woman who had played them all for fools. I turned back to the room. Pierre was checking his tablet, monitoring the fallout. Sir, he said, his voice tinged with a grim satisfaction. It is happening. The video has been shared 2 million times in 10 minutes. Every major news outlet is running it. They are calling it the wedding plot. I nodded. Good. But we are not done. What about her job? Pierre tapped a few keys. Brittany Cole works as a brand ambassador for Lux Living, a high-end lifestyle agency. Their entire brand is built on authenticity and family values. I have taken the liberty of forwarding the video directly to their CEO and their HR department, marked urgent. I checked my watch. It was 9 in the morning. The business day had just begun. At that very moment, across the city, in a glass-walled office, Brittany's boss, a woman named Eleanor Vance, was watching the video on her computer. Eleanor was a ruthless businesswoman who protected her brand like a mother bear protects her cubs. She watched Brittany plotting to imprison an elderly man. She watched Brittany admit to planning false accusations of assault. She watched Brittany dismantle the very image Lux Living tried to project. Eleanor did not hesitate. She did not call a meeting. She did not consult legal. She picked up her phone and dialed Brittany's number. I can only imagine the scene at Richard and Pamela's house. Brittany was probably still sitting on the couch, refreshing her feed, waiting for me to crumble, expecting an apology or a settlement offer. When her phone rang, she probably thought it was a reporter wanting an exclusive interview. She probably answered with her victim voice ready to spin more lies. Hello, this is Brittany, she would have said. Brittany, this is Eleanor Vance. Oh, Eleanor, hi, Brittany would have replied, brightening up. I am so glad you called. I know this looks bad, but I am the victim here. I need some time off to deal with this trauma. You do not need time off, Brittany. Eleanor said, her voice ice cold. You need a lawyer. I have seen the video. The real video. The one from the bridal suite. There was a silence on the line. A silence of total, devastating realization. That is a deep fake, Brittany stammered. He doctored it. He is rich. He can do anything. Stop it, Eleanor snapped. Just stop. We are a lifestyle brand, Brittany. We sell aspiration. We do not sell elder abuse and fraud. You are fired. Effective immediately. Your company email has been deactivated. Your access to the building is revoked. Do not come in to collect your things. We will box them up and leave them with security. And Brittany. Yes, Brittany whispered. If you ever mention that you worked for us, if you ever try to use us as a reference, I will sue you for damages to our brand reputation. You are toxic. Goodbye. The line went dead. Brittany sat there, the phone slipping from her hand. She had lost her home. She had lost her car. She had lost her husband's fortune. And now she had lost her career. The only thing she had left was her notoriety, and even that had turned sour. She was famous, yes, but she was famous as the most hated woman in America. Her parents, Richard and Pamela, were standing in the doorway, holding their own phones, their faces pale. They had seen the video too. They had seen their daughter's true nature exposed. And more importantly, they were seeing the comments about them. People were asking what kind of parents raised a monster like that. People were digging into Richard's real estate deals. People were questioning Pamela's charity work. The infection was spreading. Brittany had not just ruined herself, she was dragging her entire family down with her. Get out, Richard said quietly. Brittany looked up. Dad, what? Get out of my house, Richard yelled, losing his composure. Look at what you have done. You lied to us. You told us he attacked you. You told us you were the victim. We defended you. We put our names on the line for you, and you were plotting crimes in a bridal suite. But Dad, Brittany cried. I did it for us. I did it so we could be rich. You did it because you are greedy, Richard spat. And you are stupid. You got caught. And now the news vans are outside my house. My partners are calling me. You have ruined our name. Get your husband and get out. Jason, who had been sitting in the corner staring at the floor, stood up. He looked at Brittany. He looked at the woman who had promised him the world and had delivered him into hell. He looked at the video playing on the television where his own voice agreed to lock his father away in a urine-soaked facility. He felt a strange sensation. It was the feeling of the cord finally being cut. He realized that he hated her. He hated her greed. He hated her voice. But mostly he hated her for making him show the world what a coward he was. We have nowhere to go, Jason said, his voice hollow. That is not my problem, Richard said, turning his back on them. You figured out how to get into this mess. You figure out how to get out. 5 minutes later, the front door of the Cole residence opened. Brittany and Jason stepped out. The flashbulbs erupted. The reporters shouted questions. Brittany, why did you lie? Jason, how could you do that to your father? Are you going to jail? They put their heads down and pushed through the crowd. They walked down the street, two outcasts with no money, no job, and no home, followed by the jeers of the public they had tried to manipulate. Back in my library, I watched it all on the newsfeed. I saw them walking away. I saw the fear in their eyes. It is done, Pierre said softly. Not quite, I replied. I picked up my phone and dialed Arthur Cohen. Arthur, I said, prepare the final phase. They are desperate now, and desperate people do desperate things. We need to be ready for the final lie. What do you think they will do? Arthur asked. I looked at the screen at Brittany's stomach, which she was currently clutching protectively as she walked through the crowd. She is going to play the pregnancy card, I said. She is going to claim she is carrying the heir to the Sutton Empire, and when she does, We will be waiting with the final nail in the coffin. I hung up the phone. The house was quiet again. The storm outside had passed, but the air was still charged with the electricity of unfinished business. I went to the window and looked out at the empty driveway. The rocks were gone, swept away by the staff. The broken glass was gone. My home was pristine again. But my family was broken beyond repair. And the saddest part was that I was the one who had to swing the hammer. 2 weeks had passed since the digital execution of my son's reputation. 2 weeks of silence from the outside world, broken only by the occasional update from Pierre regarding the liquidation of Jason's few remaining assets, or the status of the defamation lawsuit Arthur had filed against Brittany. The world had moved on to the next scandal, but inside the high iron gates of my estate the air remained heavy with the anticipation of the final act. I knew they would come back. Parasites do not detach easily. They cling until the host is drained or until they are burned off, and my son and his wife were currently burning. It was a Tuesday afternoon, gray and overcast, the kind of day that feels like a heavy wool blanket draped over the sky. I was in the garden pruning the rose bushes, a task I insisted on doing myself, despite having a team of gardeners when the intercom at the main gate buzzed. It was a harsh, insistent sound that cut through the quiet dampness of the afternoon. Pierre appeared on the flagstone path, holding a portable monitor. "They are here, sir," he said simply. I did not need to ask who they were. I wiped my hands on a rag and took the monitor. The black and white feed from the gate camera showed a pitiful tableau. A rusted, dented sedan that looked like it had been salvaged from a scrapyard was idling by the curb, puffing gray smoke into the air. Standing in front of the iron bars were two figures who bore a vague resemblance to the couple that had been featured on every society page in the city just a month ago. Jason was wearing jeans that were too loose and a t-shirt that had seen better days. He looked thinner, gaunt, even his face covered in a patchy stubble that spoke of a man who had stopped looking in mirrors. Brittany was standing beside him, huddled into a large beige cardigan that wrapped around her like a cocoon. She looked pale, her hair tied back in a severe ponytail, devoid of the extensions and professional styling that had been her armor. They looked like refugees from a war they had started. "Let them in," Pierre asked, his finger hovering over the gate release. "No," I said. "I will go down to them." I did not take the Bentley. I walked. I walked down the long, winding driveway lined with ancient oaks, my boots crunching on the gravel. I wanted the walk. I wanted the time to compose my face, to lock away the father who still wanted to run to his son and offer him a hot meal, and to summon the judge who needed to pass the final sentence. When I reached the gate, I did not open it. I stood on my side of the iron bars looking out at them. The metal was cold under my hand. To them, I must have looked like a lord in his castle, unapproachable and distant. To me, they looked like strangers. Jason saw me first. He rushed to the bars, gripping them with dirty hands. "Dad," he choked out. "Dad, please. You have to talk to us. We have nowhere else to go." I looked at him. I looked at the dark circles under his eyes, the tremor in his hands. He was going through withdrawal, not just from his gambling addiction, but from the addiction to ease. He was detoxing from a life of privilege. "I have nothing to say to you, Jason," I said calmly. "Arthur made the terms of our separation very clear. You are trespassing." "We are starving, Dad," Jason cried, tears mixing with the grime on his face. "We have been sleeping in that car. Brittany's parents kicked us out. My friends won't return my calls. I can't get a job. Everywhere I go, people know who I am. They know about the video. Nobody will hire me." "That is the consequence of your actions," I replied. "You wanted fame. You got it." Brittany stepped forward then. She pushed Jason aside gently, almost protectively. It was a strange gesture for a woman who had looked at him with such hatred in the motel room. She looked up at me, her eyes large and watery. She wasn't playing the victim anymore. She was playing the martyr. "Bernard," she said, her voice soft and trembling. I know you hate me. I know I deserve it. I was awful. I was greedy and stupid and cruel. You can punish me all you want. You can let me starve. But please, don't punish him. She placed a hand on her stomach. It was a deliberate theatrical movement. She rubbed the fabric of her oversized cardigan in a slow circle. I didn't want to tell you like this, she whispered, looking down at the ground and then back up at me through her lashes. I wanted to wait until things were better. But we can't wait anymore. We need help, not for us, for the baby. Jason looked at her, then at me, nodding vigorously. Yes, Dad. That is why we came. We found out 3 days ago. Brittany is pregnant. You are going to be a grandfather. I watched them. I watched the performance. It was better than the live stream. It was visceral. Brittany clutched her stomach as if she were protecting a fragile jewel from the cold wind. She took a step closer to the gate, pressing her body against the bars. He is your flesh and blood, Bernard, she pleaded. He is the heir to the Sutton name. I can handle sleeping in a car. I can handle being hungry. But I can't let your grandson suffer. Stress is bad for the baby. Malnutrition is bad for the baby. Please, just let us in. Just let us have a room. Any room. We will sleep in the servants' quarters. We will do anything. Just save him. She began to weep soft, racking sobs that shook her small frame. Jason dropped to his knees on the asphalt. He literally fell to his knees, clasping his hands together in a gesture of prayer. Dad, please, he begged, looking up at me. I messed up. I know I messed up, but this is a fresh start. This is a new life. Do not punish an innocent child for my sins. If you have any heart left, if you ever loved me, help us. We need money for a doctor. We need a safe place. We are begging you. The scene was biblical in its desperation. The prodigal son and the repentant mother kneeling in the dirt, begging for scraps to save the dynasty. Any observer would have been moved. Any father would have felt his resolve crumbling. A grandchild, the ultimate trump card, the promise of legacy, the continuation of the bloodline. It was the one thing money couldn't buy, the one thing a lonely old man is supposed to crave above all else. Brittany looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, her hand still rubbing her belly. I will sign a prenup, she offered, her voice shaking. I will sign away my rights to everything. I will sign a contract that says I get nothing if we divorce. I don't care about the money anymore. I just want my baby to be safe. Please, Grandpa, don't let him die out here in the cold. She used the word grandpa like a weapon, a precision strike aimed directly at the heart. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was betting everything on biology. She was gambling that my biological imperative to protect my lineage would override my intellectual knowledge of her character. I looked at Jason kneeling in the dirt, reducing himself to a beggar for a lie he probably believed. I looked at Brittany, whose eyes were shining, not just with tears, but with a tiny hidden spark of hope. She thought she had me. She thought she had found the crack in the armor. She thought that the mention of a baby would make the gates swing open and the checkbook appear. I stayed silent for a long time. I let the wind blow through the trees. I let them kneel there, the cold seeping into their bones. I looked at her stomach, hidden beneath the layers of wool. I thought about the timing. I thought about the desperation. And I thought about the phone call I had made to Arthur Cohen the night of the live stream. They were waiting for a reaction. They were waiting for me to unlock the gate, to rush out and embrace them, to cry tears of joy and relief. They were waiting for the happy ending where all is forgiven because a baby fixes everything. Instead, I reached into the inside pocket of my gardening jacket. I did not pull out a key. I did not pull out a checkbook. I pulled out a single folded piece of white paper. You are pregnant. I asked, my voice flat, betraying nothing. Yes, Brittany breathed, nodding. 6 weeks. It is a miracle, Bernard. After everything, a miracle. And it is Jason's. Of course it is Jason's. She looked offended, hurt that I would even ask. Who else would it be? We are married. We love each other. This baby was made from love. Jason nodded from his knees. It is mine, Dad. I swear. I am going to be a father. I am going to do it right this time. I am going to be like you. I unfolded the paper slowly. The crisp sound of the paper opening was the only noise in the quiet afternoon. Stand up, Jason, I said. Jason scrambled to his feet, wiping his dirty knees, a look of hopeful anticipation on his face. He thought this was it. He thought he was being welcomed home. I held the paper up against the bars of the gate, pressing it flat so they could read it. Then you might want to explain this, I said. Jason took the paper through the bars. His hands were shaking so badly that the paper rattled a dry, crinkling sound in the dead silence of the afternoon. He stared at the document. It was a lab report from a private toxicology firm in Zurich, the kind used by high-end insurance companies to detect fraud. It was dense with chemical names and percentages, a wall of data that meant nothing to a layman. What is this? Jason asked, his voice thin and watery. I don't understand. Read the highlighted section, Jason, I said. He squinted, wiping a smudge of dirt from his face. Sample source hair follicle B. Cole. Analysis hormonal panel. Detected compounds levonorgestrel and ethinyl estradiol. Concentration high. Consistency daily ingestion for the past 180 days. He looked up at me, confusion clouding his eyes. What does this mean? Is she sick? Is this why we need money for a doctor? I looked at Brittany. She had stopped rubbing her stomach. Her hand had dropped to her side, and her face had gone the color of old ash. She knew what those chemicals were. She took them every morning with a glass of water. It means she is on birth control, Jason, I said. Strong daily oral contraceptives. She has been taking them for 6 months. She was taking them the night she says she conceived. She was taking them this morning. Jason froze. He turned his head slowly to look at his wife. Brittany, it's for my skin. Brittany stammered, taking a step back. Her eyes were darting around, looking for an exit, looking for a lie that would stick. It's for my complexion. It balances my hormones. You know I have bad skin. You don't take birth control if you are trying to get pregnant, Jason whispered. You told me we were trying. You told me you stopped taking them a year ago. I reached into my pocket again. I pulled out a second piece of paper. It was a printout of an email confirmation. And this, I said, sliding it through the bars so it fluttered to the ground. At Jason's feet is a receipt. Jason stared at it. He didn't want to pick it up. He knew that if he touched it, the last shred of his reality would dissolve. But he couldn't help himself. He crouched down and lifted the paper from the asphalt. Order confirmation, numbered 44921. He read aloud, his voice trembling. Vendorfakeababy.com. Item customizable sonogram. 6 weeks. Rush shipping. Delivery address 42 Maple Drive. That's your parents' house. He looked at the date on the receipt. 2 days ago. There is no baby. Jason. I said, my voice devoid of triumph, filled only with a cold, heavy finality. There is no miracle. There is no heir. There is only a receipt for $29.99 plus shipping. She bought a prop. She knew the only way to get back into this house, the only way to unlock the bank accounts, was to present a hostage. She didn't carry a child. She carried a Trojan horse. Jason stood up. He looked at the paper in his hand, then at the woman shivering in the oversized cardigan. The woman who had sworn on her life, on their love, that she was carrying his child. You faked it, Jason asked. His voice wasn't angry. It was broken. It sounded like something glass shattering under deep water. Brittany's face crumpled. The mask of the martyr fell away, revealing the terrified cornered rat beneath. "I had to," she screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "We were starving, Jason. You couldn't fix it. You were useless. You sat around crying about your dad while we slept in a car. I had to do something. I had to get us back inside. So you lied about a baby," Jason yelled, the anger finally igniting. "You lied about my child. It was a strategy," she shrieked back. "It was the only thing that would work on him. Look at him. He doesn't care about you. He doesn't care about us. He only cares about his legacy. I gave him what he wanted so we could survive." "You used me," Jason whispered. "You used me to get to him." "I did it for us," Brittany insisted, grabbing his arm. If we got the money, we could have had a real baby later." "It wouldn't have mattered. We would have been safe." Jason looked down at her hand on his arm. It was the hand of a stranger. The woman he loved. The woman he had destroyed his relationship with his father for did not exist. She was a fiction, a character played by an actress who had forgotten her lines. He shoved her away. It was a hard, violent shove that sent her stumbling back against the rusted sedan. "Don't touch me," he said. "Jason, please," Brittany cried, reaching for him again. "We can still fix this. We can leave. We can go somewhere else." "Go where?" Jason laughed, a manic, terrifying sound. "We have no money. We have no car. And now I have no wife." He turned to me. He walked up to the bars, gripping them tightly. He looked at me, and I saw the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He realized that every warning I had given him, every silent look of disapproval over the years, every doubt he had suppressed, was right. He realized he had burned his kingdom for a handful of ash. "You knew," Jason said to me. "You knew the whole time." I suspected. I corrected. I investigated. I verified, Jason. I always verify. That is why I still have my fortune, and that is why you have nothing. Jason nodded slowly. He looked at the receipt in his hand one last time, then crumpled it into a ball and dropped it in the dirt. He looked at Brittany, who was huddled by the car, weeping real tears, now tears for herself, for her failed gamble. "I'm done," Jason said. He turned and started walking down the road. He didn't look back at the car. He didn't look back at the woman. He didn't look back at the estate. He just walked. His shoulders hunched against the cold, a solitary figure disappearing into the gray afternoon. Brittany watched him go. She looked at me, her eyes filled with hate. "I hope you die alone, old man," she spat. I smiled. It was a small, sad smile. "I might die alone, Brittany," I said. "But I will die honest, and I will die in my own bed. You, my dear, will have to find somewhere else to sleep tonight." I turned my back on her and walked up the driveway. Behind me, I heard the engine of the rusted sedan cough and sputter to life. I heard the tires crunch on the gravel as she drove away. The gate remained locked. The fortress held. But as I walked back to my empty house, I felt the weight of the victory. It was heavy. It was the weight of a father who had saved his son's life by destroying his son's world. Jason was broken, yes, but he was free. The parasite was gone, and now the rebuilding could perhaps one day begin. The day after I turned my son away from the gate, I made the final phone call to Arthur Cohen. It was not a call made out of anger, but out of a necessary finality. I sat in my library, surrounded by the silence of a house that was too big for one man, and I signed the documents that would ensure my legacy was protected from greed. I established the Clara Sutton Foundation, named after my late wife, dedicated to providing housing and legal support for the elderly who had been abandoned or exploited by their families. It was a fitting tribute. I transferred 90% of my liquid assets and the ownership of the Oakhaven estate into the trust. I left myself enough to live comfortably, but to the world, and to any future vultures circling my carcass, Bernard Sutton was no longer a billionaire. I was just a man with a comfortable pension and a very good lawyer. 3 months later, I took the old rusted sedan out for a drive. It was the car Brittany had mocked, the car that had started this entire war. I drove to the industrial side of the city, a place where the air smells of exhaust and hard work. I pulled into the lot of a car wash called the Spotless Shine. It was not one of my properties. It was just a place that hired men who needed a second chance. I saw him in the bay. He was wearing a blue jumpsuit that was stained with grease and soap. He was scrubbing the rims of a luxury SUV, the kind he used to drive. My son, Jason. He looked thinner. His face was tanned from working outside, and his hands were red and chapped. He was not the soft boy in the tuxedo anymore. He was a man earning minimum wage. I watched him for a long time. I watched him sweat. I watched him take orders from a manager who was younger than him. I watched him keep his head down and do the work. He did not see me at first. When he finally looked up and saw the sedan, his eyes widened. He stopped scrubbing. He held his rag in mid-air, dripping soapy water onto the concrete. He did not run over to beg. He did not scream. He simply looked at me. He nodded once, a short, sharp acknowledgement of my presence, and then he went back to work. He scrubbed the tire with a vigor I had never seen him apply to anything in his life. I rolled up the window and drove away. My heart ached, but for the first time in years, it also felt a flicker of pride. He was scrubbing floors just like I had done 40 years ago. He was finally starting his life at the bottom, where character is built. Brittany Cole did not find redemption. She found the justice system. The fake sonogram was just the tip of the iceberg. When Arthur Cohen dug deeper into her finances during the defamation lawsuit, he found the cracks in her facade. She had forged my signature on a lease application 2 months prior. She had taken out credit cards in Jason's name without his knowledge. The district attorney was very interested in her activities. She was indicted on 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of identity theft. The last I heard, she was trading her designer wardrobe for a jumpsuit that matched Jason's work uniform, but hers was issued by the state penitentiary. She wanted to live rent-free, and she got her wish. 6 months after the wedding, that never happened, I found myself sitting on the teak deck of a vessel, drifting off the coast of the Amalfi Coast. The water was a shade of blue that looked like painted glass. The air smelled of salt and lemon blossoms. I was not alone. Pierre was sitting in the lounge chair next to me, wearing linen trousers and sunglasses, looking less like a stiff manager and more like a movie star on vacation. He was reading a book and smiling. Jean-Luc the chef emerged from the galley, holding a silver tray. He was not wearing his chef's coat. He was wearing a floral shirt that I had bought him in a market in Naples. "Lunch is served, gentlemen," Jean-Luc announced, placing the tray on the table. Fresh catch of the day, grilled with herbs and a bottle of local white wine. I picked up my glass. The condensation was cool against my hand. I looked at these 2 men. They were my employees, yes, but they were also the only people who had stood by me when the world was throwing rocks. They were loyal. They were honest. They were my family. "To the good life," Pierre said, raising his glass. "To the quiet life," Jean-Luc added. I clinked my glass against theirs. The sound rang out clear and true over the water. "To freedom," I said. I took a sip of the wine. It was crisp and cold. I looked out at the horizon where the sky met the sea. I had lost a son, but I hoped that one day I might meet the man he was becoming. I had lost a daughter-in-law, but I had gained my self-respect. I was 72 years old. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I had stripped away the lies, the parasites, and the noise. I was Bernard Sutton, the mechanic who built an empire, and I was finally enjoying the view. This journey taught me that true wealth is never measured by the balance in a bank account, but by the integrity of your character. My son and his wife were so blinded by the glare of gold that they failed to see the diamond of unconditional love standing right in front of them. They mistook my modesty for poverty and my silence for weakness. I learned that you cannot save people who view family as a financial strategy. Sometimes the greatest act of love is to cut the cord and let them face the storm alone. Peace, I found, is the only luxury truly worth fighting for. If you believe that dignity is priceless and justice is best served. Cold, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments. Would you have given Jason a second chance?